My name is Alara Vance. I'm 19 years old, and for as long as I can remember, the rhythm of my life has been tied to the tides of Port Blossom, our small coastal town nestled against the rugged Oregon shoreline. The scent of salt and damp pine is the first thing I remember, a fragrance woven into the fabric of my earliest memories, a scent my mother once said was the town's own quiet lullaby. She loved the ocean, its vastness and its secrets, and she passed that love on to me. It was our shared dream that I would one day study it, unraveling its mysteries at Westridge Coastal University, just a few hours' drive down the coast. My mother passed away from a sudden illness when I was 9. The world, which had once felt as boundless and promising as the Pacific, shrank to the four walls of our small, gray-shingled house. My father, Rob, a man whose kindness was as quiet as the morning mist, retreated into himself. He was a woodcarver, and his grief took the shape of shorebirds, their slender forms emerging from blocks of driftwood under his patient hands. He filled the house with them, silent sentinels on every shelf and windowsill, as if their stillness could absorb the ache that had settled over us. A year later, he married Diane. She arrived in our lives like a sudden squall, all sharp edges and polished surfaces, a stark contrast to the gentle, weathered landscape of our town. She brought with her a son, Aiden, who was a few years older than me and carried his mother's same air of detached entitlement. From the beginning, it was clear that Diane viewed me as part of the scenery, a fixture of the house she had inherited along with my father. I was a quiet child, and I learned to be quieter still, a ghost in my own home, my presence tolerated but never truly welcomed. Diane's focus was on Aiden, on his achievements, his needs, his future. Mine was an afterthought. But I had my mother's dream, a beacon in the quiet fog of my existence. When I turned 16, I got a job at the Salty Mug, the town's only real coffee shop, a cozy place that always smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. Every dollar I earned, every tip that was pressed into my hand by a tourist charmed by our town's quaintness, went into a large glass jar I kept hidden in my closet. I also sold my art to small, detailed watercolor paintings of seashells and tidal pools, at the weekend market down by the docks. I kept a meticulous ledger, a small, leather-bound notebook where I recorded every deposit. Watching the total grow, first to $100, then $1,000, then $10,000, was like watching the tide come in, a slow but certain promise of reaching my goal. My college fund became my private harbor, a secret place of hope that belonged only to me. When the total reached $12,500, I felt a surge of pride so immense it almost brought me to tears. It was enough for my first year's tuition and board at Westridge. The dream felt real, tangible, within my grasp. It was Diane who noticed the ledger I'd accidentally left on my desk. "What's this, Alara?" she'd asked, her voice laced with a saccharine curiosity that always set my teeth on edge. I explained, my voice hesitant. It felt like revealing a precious, fragile thing to someone who wouldn't understand its worth. To my surprise, she seemed impressed. $12,500, she'd said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the page. "That's quite a nest egg. But you shouldn't just let it sit in a bank account, dear. It's losing value to inflation. You should invest it. Let it work for you." Her talk of high-yield funds and market growth was dizzying, but it sounded so professional, so responsible. She was an adult, a financial planner by trade, or so she often claimed. And in that moment, I wanted so desperately to be seen by her, to earn a sliver of the approval she so freely gave to Aiden. I made a mistake born of that longing. I trusted her. I withdrew the money, my life savings, and handed it to her, along with a carefully written note asking her to invest it for my Westridge fund. I thought, perhaps, this was a turning point, a bridge across the chasm that had always existed between us. I was wrong. It wasn't a bridge, it was a cliff. "You did what?" My voice was a thin, brittle thing in the quiet of our kitchen. The words seemed to hang in the air, suspended in the steam rising from my teacup. My stomach coiled into a tight, painful knot. Diane didn't even look up from the wedding invitation she was addressing. Her pen flowed across the thick, creamy cardstock in elegant loops. She was the picture of unbothered grace. "I used it for the wedding, Ilara," she said, her tone as smooth and cool as a river stone. "Aiden and his fiancée needed a bit of help. It was family money, after all." "You'll make more." "Family money?" I repeated the words, my voice cracking on the second one. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thick to breathe. "That was my money. For college. I worked for 3 years, Diane. You told me you were going to invest it." She finally looked at me, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "And I did," she said, her voice sharpening. "I invested it in something important. An investment in family unity, in a beautiful memory for your brother. Honestly, you should value that more than a few dollars." Her son. Not my brother. Aiden, whose idea of a beautiful memory involved a caterer flown in from Portland and a string quartet. The cost of the floral arrangements alone would have covered my textbooks for 4 years. A hot, furious wave washed over me, but before I could find the words to respond, my father shuffled into the kitchen, a half-finished wooden puffin in his hand. "What's all the commotion?" he asked, his gaze shifting uneasily between my rigid posture and Diane's dismissive calm. "Ask her," I choked out, pointing a trembling finger at my stepmother. "She took my college money. She spent it all on Aiden's wedding." My father's brow furrowed. He looked at Diane, a question in his eyes. She offered him a placid smile and a small shrug, as if discussing the weather. "It was a loan, Rob. A family matter. Ilara is being a bit dramatic." "A loan? You didn't ask me." I cried, my voice rising with a frantic edge I barely recognized. "I don't understand," my father mumbled, turning the wooden bird over and over in his hands, his knuckles white. He hated conflict more than anything. He built his life around avoiding it, retreating to the quiet solitude of his workshop whenever tensions rose. Diane knew this. She counted on it. "There's nothing to understand, darling," she said, standing up and smoothing down her silk blouse. She kissed his cheek, a perfunctory gesture that held no warmth. "I'm late for my yoga class." She breezed out of the room, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and shattered silence in her wake. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the puffin in his hands as if it held the answers to the universe. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, Ilara," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Let me talk to her when she gets back." "A misunderstanding?" The words tore from my throat, raw with disbelief and betrayal. "Dad," she admitted it. "She doesn't even care. She thinks she was right to do it." He had no response. He just shook his head, a gesture of helpless defeat, and retreated towards the back door, towards the sanctuary of his workshop. The click of the door latch behind him was the sound of my last hope extinguishing. I was alone in the kitchen, surrounded by my father's silent, wooden birds, the weight of Diane's casual cruelty pressing down on me until I could hardly breathe. She hadn't just stolen my savings, she had stolen my future, a future I had painstakingly built, $1, one painting, one exhausting shift at a time. And my own father had stood by and let it happen. That night, I lay in my bed and listened to the distant, rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore. For hours, my grief was a wild, churning sea. But as the first pale light of dawn began to touch the sky, the storm inside me began to quiet. The churning grief settled, hardened, and became something else entirely. It became resolve. A cold, clear, unshakable resolve. She was not going to get away with this. My father may have chosen his peace over my future, but I would not. If he wouldn't fight for me, then I would have to learn to fight for myself. The next morning, I walked into the Port Blossom Public Library, my hands still shaking slightly, and found a flyer on the community bulletin board for a local attorney. His name was Alistair Finch. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and dialed his number. "I need some advice," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. My stepmother took my savings. It was for my education. I need to know if there's anything I can do to get it back. There was a thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. Possibly, Mr. Finch's calm, measured voice replied. If you can prove the funds were exclusively yours and that she used them without your consent, you may have a strong case. But it will mean taking legal action against her. It won't be easy. Are you prepared for that? I thought of the glass jar, of the worn pages of my ledger, of the scent of the ocean that was my mother's legacy. I thought of Diane's smug smile and my father's averted eyes. The choice was not a choice at all. It was a necessity. Yes, I said, the word solid and sure. I'm prepared. When I told my father I had retained a lawyer and was filing a lawsuit, he looked horrified. He paced the small living room, running a hand through his perpetually messy hair. Elara, are you sure about this? A lawsuit? It will tear this family apart. This family is already torn, I said, my voice quiet but firm. She tore it apart when she stole from me, Dad. This isn't about causing drama. It's about what is right. His shoulders slumped in that familiar gesture of defeat. Just then, Diane walked in, her arms full of shopping bags from a boutique in the next town over. She took in the scene, her lips thinning into a line of pure annoyance. So, I hear you've decided to make a spectacle of yourself, she said, her voice dripping with scorn. You're really going to drag your family through a public mess over a little bit of money? How incredibly childish. The heat rose in my cheeks, but I held her gaze. It's $12,500, Diane. It's my entire future. And I'm not going to let you dismiss it, or me, anymore. A slow, cold smirk spread across her face. It was the look of someone who had never lost a battle and never expected to. Do what you have to do, sweetheart, she said, turning away with a dismissive flick of her wrist. You won't win. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. She thought I was just a quiet, timid girl she could steamroll. She thought her will was stronger than mine. She had underestimated the depths of a dream and the strength of the person holding on to it. With Mr. Finch's guidance, I filed the papers. It was no longer just about the money. It was about respect. It was about proving to her, to my father, and most importantly, to myself, that I was not an afterthought. I had a voice, and I was finally ready to use it. Filing a lawsuit against my own stepmother felt like setting sail into a storm without a map. I was navigating uncharted waters, and the fragile peace of our household, already fractured, shattered completely. My father treated me with a pained, careful distance, his conversations limited to clipped questions about whether I needed a ride or if I'd be home for dinner. He spent more time than ever in his workshop, the rhythmic scrape of sandpaper and the sharp scent of cedar becoming the soundtrack to his retreat. Diane, however, chose a different tactic. Her warfare was cold and psychological. She'd leave articles on the kitchen counter about frivolous lawsuits being thrown out of court. She'd hum cheerfully while making casual comments to my father, loud enough for me to hear, about the importance of family loyalty. Some people just don't understand what it means to be part of a team, Rob, she'd say, her eyes flicking to me for a fraction of a second. But for every passive-aggressive barb, my resolve hardened like sea-worn stone. The court date was set for 2 months away. My lawyer, Mr. Alastair Finch, was an oasis of calm in my turbulent life. His office, located above the town's old bookstore, was a quiet haven filled with the comforting smell of aging paper and weak tea. He was a small, meticulous man with kind eyes and a reassuringly steady demeanor. The burden of proof is on us, Elara, he explained during our first formal meeting, peering at me over his spectacles. Your bank statements are a solid foundation. But do you have anything else? A written agreement? A witness? My heart sank a little. No formal agreement, I admitted, pushing a worn file folder across his cluttered desk. Just my ledger, all my pay stubs from the salty mug, and the sales records from my paintings. And there was this. I pulled out the small, folded note I had given her with the money. It read, "Diane, here is the $12,500 for the investment fund for Westridge. Thank you for helping me. Ilara." Mr. Finch read the note carefully, his expression unreadable. "It's not a contract," he said slowly, "but it demonstrates intent. It shows what you believed the money was for. It helps. I'll subpoena her bank records and Aiden's wedding vendor contracts. If the timelines and amounts match up, we can draw a very clear line from your savings to her expenditures." The weeks leading up to the trial were some of the loneliest of my life. The tension in the house was a thick, suffocating blanket. One evening, my father found me on the back porch, staring out at the darkening line of the ocean. He stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the warm kitchen light. "Ilara," he began, his voice strained. "Please, reconsider this. Diane she's your stepmother. This is permanent. Can't we find another way?" I turned to look at him, the sea breeze cool against my hot cheeks. "What other way is there, Dad?" I asked her to give it back. She laughed at me. "I asked you for help, and you went to your workshop. She left me no other way." He flinched, the truth of my words hitting him. "I just don't want to see our family destroyed." A bitter laugh escaped me. "What family?" I asked, my voice quieter now, heavy with a sadness that went deeper than anger. "The one where her son gets a lavish wedding paid for with my future? The one where you hide from any and every problem? That's not a family, Dad. It's just people living in the same house, pretending things are okay." He had no answer. He just stood there for a long moment before retreating back inside, leaving me alone with the sound of the waves. My only solace was my best friend, Maya. She worked with me at the Salty Mug, and her fierce, unwavering loyalty was a lighthouse in my personal storm. We'd sit in a corner booth after our shifts, nursing mugs of tea while I recounted the latest domestic horror. "She's a monster, Ilara," Maya said one rainy afternoon, her dark eyes flashing with indignation. "A perfectly dressed, smiling monster. You are doing the absolute right thing. Don't you dare let them make you feel guilty." "But what if I lose?" I whispered, the fear a constant, cold companion. "What if the judge believes her? Then I'll have nothing. No money, and no family at all." "You won't lose," Maya insisted, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You have the truth on your side. And even if the whole world is crazy and you don't win, you still stood up for yourself. You drew a line in the sand and said no more. That's a victory no one can ever take away from you." Her words were a lifeline. This fight was becoming less about the $12,500 and more about reclaiming the person I was before Diane had taught me to be small and silent. It was about honoring the girl who had worked so hard, the girl who had a dream her mother had given her. It was about proving my own worth to myself. A week before the trial, Mr. Finch called me into his office. He had a stack of papers on his desk, Diane's subpoenaed financial records. His expression was grim. "We've found something, Ilara," he said, tapping a highlighted column of figures. "It's more than just the wedding. It seems your stepmother has been systematically moving money from a joint account she shares with your father into a private one under her name alone. For years. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. It looks like she's been using it to fund a lifestyle consulting business that, as far as we can tell, has no clients and no income. It's a shell." I stared at the papers, the numbers blurring before my eyes. I had known Diane was selfish, but I hadn't understood the scale of her deception. This wasn't just a single act of callousness against me, it was a long-term pattern of deceit against my father. "This significantly strengthens your case," Mr. Finch continued, his voice gentle. "It establishes a clear pattern of financial dishonesty. But I need to ask you, are you prepared to use this? It will undoubtedly have a profound impact on your father." I went home that night with copies of the statements in my bag. The weight of them felt immense. Exposing this would mean detonating a bomb in the middle of my father's life, destroying the foundation of his marriage and the reality he had chosen to believe in for a decade. I sat with Maya on the cold, damp sand of the beach that evening, the waves washing in and out in a steady, calming rhythm. "I don't know if I can do that to him," I confessed, my voice thick. "He's weak, and he let me down, but he's still my dad. This will break him." Maya hugged her knees to her chest, watching the gray water. "Maybe," she said softly. "Or maybe it's the thing that will finally wake him up. Sometimes you have to break something to let the light in, you know?" The morning of the trial, the air was thick with the promise of rain. I walked into the small, wood-paneled county courthouse feeling a strange sense of calm. The storm was no longer inside me, it was here, now, and I just had to see it through. Diane sat across the room with her lawyer, looking impeccable in a cream-colored suit, a portrait of wronged innocence. My father sat beside her, his face ashen, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. He didn't look at me once. I took a deep breath and focused on Mr. Finch's steady presence beside me. The proceedings began. My lawyer laid out our case with quiet precision, presenting my ledger, my bank statements, the handwritten note. He established the source of the money and my clear intention for its use. "The evidence shows a clear breach of fiduciary duty and trust," Mr. Finch stated, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Ms. Vance entrusted her education fund to her stepmother, who then misappropriated those funds for personal use." Diane's lawyer countered, painting a picture of a close-knit, blended family where finances were fluid and shared. He portrayed me as an ungrateful and overly dramatic teenager. Mrs. Vance was simply helping one child with an important life event, with the full expectation of helping the other later on. "This is a family dispute, not a legal matter." That was when Mr. Finch played his hand. "Your Honor, we have evidence that suggests this was not an isolated incident of fluid family finances, but part of a larger pattern of financial deception." He presented the subpoenaed records of the joint account and Diane's secret one. As he detailed the systematic withdrawals, the thousands of dollars siphoned off over years for a phantom business, a heavy silence fell over the courtroom. I risked a glance at my father. His face had gone from pale to chalk white. He leaned back slowly, his mouth slightly agape, the carefully constructed world he lived in crumbling around him in real time. For the first time all morning, Diane looked flustered. Her mask of serene confidence had finally cracked. When it was my turn to take the stand, my heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice, when I spoke, was clear and steady. I looked directly at the judge, a stern-faced woman with intelligent eyes. "That money wasn't just dollars in an account," I said, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "It was 3 years of my life. It was every early morning and late night at the cafe. It was every weekend spent selling my art in the wind and the rain. It was a promise I made to myself and to my mother's memory. I trusted Diane. I asked for her help, and she took that trust and that dream and spent it on flowers and a fancy dinner for her son. This isn't about being dramatic. It's about respect. It's about asking for the simple justice of getting back what is mine." As I stepped down and returned to my seat, I felt a profound sense of release. I had spoken my truth. Whatever happened next, I had honored myself and my journey. The air in the courtroom was electric, the unspoken truth of Diane's character now laid bare for everyone to see. The judge looked from the financial statements to Diane, then to my father's shattered expression, and finally, to me. The verdict felt close, a tangible thing hanging in the tense, silent air. The judge, a woman named Eleanor Vance, no relation, a coincidence that felt like a small wink from the universe, stared down from her bench, her expression unreadable. She reviewed the documents Mr. Finch had presented, her gaze lingering on the damning evidence of Diane's secret account. The silence in the courtroom was a living thing, thick with my father's dawning horror and Diane's barely suppressed fury. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said, her voice cutting through the tension with crisp authority, "the evidence before me is quite clear. You admit to taking your stepdaughter's savings. Your defense is that it was an informal family loan. However, the additional evidence of this separate, undisclosed account suggests a disturbing pattern of financial concealment and misappropriation. It casts serious doubt on your claim of benevolent family intent. Diane's lawyer rose, stammering a weak rebuttal about personal privacy and marital finances, but the judge held up a hand, silencing him. A person's savings for their education, earned through their own labor, is not a communal family piggy bank, especially when the person it was spent on was not consulted, Judge Vance stated, her eyes fixed on Diane. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a profound breach of trust. I watched my father. He sat hunched in his chair, staring at his hands, which were resting, trembling, on his knees. It was as if the weight of a decade of willful ignorance had finally come crashing down on him. He looked smaller, older. When Diane was given a chance to speak, she rose with a flicker of her old, defiant composure. Your Honor, she began, her voice smooth but tight, this entire situation has been exaggerated by a very emotional young woman. I acted in what I believed were the best interests of the entire family. And paying for luxury spa days and designer handbags from a secret account funded by your husband's income was also in the best interests of the family, the judge countered, her voice sharp as glass. Diane's composure shattered. A blotchy, red flush crept up her neck. That is a private matter between my husband and me. You made it a public matter when you established a pattern of behavior that directly impacts the credibility of your testimony in this case, the judge said coolly. I have heard enough. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The culmination of months of anxiety, isolation, and a desperate, burgeoning hope. In the matter of Elara Vance versus Diane Vance, the judge declared, her voice ringing with finality, I rule in favor of the plaintiff. Mrs. Vance, you are hereby ordered to repay the full amount of $12,500, plus statutory interest, to Ms. Elara Vance within 30 days. Furthermore, I would strongly advise Mr. Vance to seek a full forensic accounting of his joint finances. A collective exhale seemed to ripple through the small gallery. Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees felt weak. It wasn't just about the money. It was the validation. The public acknowledgement that I had been wronged, that my feelings were not an exaggeration, that my dream was not insignificant. I had been seen. I had been heard. As the court adjourned, Diane shot me a look of pure, unadulterated venom. She leaned close as she passed my table, her voice a low hiss. You'll regret this, Elara. You've destroyed this family. I met her gaze without flinching, a strange, quiet strength rising within me. No, Diane, I said, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of my conviction. You did. You just never thought you'd be held accountable. In the hallway, which smelled of floor wax and old raincoats, my father intercepted me. His face was a wreck of emotions, shame, regret, confusion. Elara, he started, his voice cracking. I didn't know. About the other account. About any of it. I swear. For a moment, all the old anger and hurt surged. But looking at his broken expression, I felt a pang of something else, something closer to pity. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, Dad, I said, my voice softer than I intended. It was easier to look away. It was easier to believe her than to stand up to her. That's what hurt the most. He nodded slowly, the fight gone out of him. You're right, he whispered, his eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it was startling. I let you down. I am so sorry. It wasn't the powerful, redemptive apology a daughter might dream of, but it was honest. It was a beginning. For the first time, I saw him not just as the father who had failed me, but as a man trapped in his own quiet prison, now facing the rubble of the life he thought he had. I walked out of the courthouse and into the cool, misty air of Port Blossom. The threatened rain had held off, and a sliver of sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a silvery light on the wet pavement. I pulled out my phone and saw a text from Maya. You are a warrior. Tea and celebratory scones on me tonight. A real, genuine smile spread across my face. I typed back a single word, absolutely. The legal battle was over. But I knew the real journey, the one of rebuilding my life from the ground up, was just beginning. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt ready for it. I wasn't just the girl with a broken heart and a stolen dream anymore. I was the girl who had fought back and won. The aftermath of the trial was strangely quiet. The verdict had sent a shockwave through our house, and the silence it left behind was profound. Diane paid the court-ordered amount within a week, the money transferred to my account without a word. She moved through the house like a phantom, her usual vibrant presence replaced by a cold, simmering rage. Her polished armor was gone, and what was left was brittle and resentful. My father, meanwhile, was adrift. The revelation of Diane's decade-long deception had shattered his reality. I would find him sitting in the living room late at night, a stack of bank statements on the coffee table, just staring into space. He had followed the judge's advice and hired an accountant, and every new discovery seemed to carve a deeper line into his face. One evening, I brought him a cup of tea. He looked up at me, his eyes weary. "She called it her independence fund," he said, his voice hollow. "She said she was building something for us. For our future." I sat on the arm of the opposite chair, not knowing what to say. "You believed her," I said finally. "It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact." He nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "I wanted to believe her," he corrected softly. "It was easier." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. 2 weeks after the trial, Diane was gone. She packed her bags while my father and I were out and left a short, typed note on the kitchen counter that simply listed a P.O. box where her remaining things could be sent. There was no apology, no explanation, no goodbye. Her departure didn't feel like a victory, just a quiet, necessary end. The house immediately felt lighter, as if it could finally breathe again. The air no longer crackled with unspoken tension. I could walk into a room without bracing myself for a fight. Aiden never called. I received a single, stilted text message from him a month later that read, "Mom told me what happened. It's a mess." There was no apology for his role in it, no acknowledgement of the wedding I had unwillingly financed. For a moment, it stung. But then I realized, with a clarity that surprised me, that I didn't need anything from him. His validation was worthless. My fight had never really been about him. With the money safely back in my account and the future I had fought for once again in my own hands, I threw myself into my college applications. Spreading the forms out on the dining room table, a space I had avoided for years, felt like an act of reclamation. For the first time, my father took an active interest. "Westridge Coastal," he said one afternoon, peering over my shoulder at a brochure. "Your mother always talked about that place." He paused, then added, his voice thick with emotion, "I can't change what happened, Elara. But I can help now. I want to help." I hesitated, the old wounds still tender. But then I looked at his face, at the genuine, pleading hope in his eyes, and I nodded. "Okay, Dad," I said. "I'd like that." We started small. He helped me calculate financial aid. He drove me to the campus for a tour. He sat with me for hours while I agonized over my application essay. It was awkward and clumsy, this new dance we were learning, but it was real. We were slowly, tentatively, building a new kind of family from the wreckage of the old one. The trial taught me more than I could have imagined. It taught me that my voice, however quiet, had power. It taught me that setting a boundary isn't an act of aggression, but an act of self-preservation. It taught me that you can't force someone to see your worth, you have to see it in yourself first. I was not the timid girl who hid in the shadows anymore. I was a person who knew the weight of her own work and the value of her own dreams. Months later, a thick envelope with the Westridge Coastal University logo arrived in the mail. My hands trembled as I tore it open. My father stood beside me, holding his breath. I unfolded the letter, and my eyes scanned the first line, "Dear Miss Vance, it is with great pleasure that we offer you admission." I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. My father wrapped me in a fierce hug, and for the first time since I was a little girl, I hugged him back without reservation. Standing on the bluff overlooking the campus on move-in day, the salty wind whipping through my hair, I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. The ocean stretched out before me, vast and blue and full of promise. My father fussed with the boxes in the back of his truck, asking for the 10th time if I was sure I had enough towels. His nervous energy was endearing now, a sign that he cared. "I'm good, Dad," I said, smiling at him. "Thank you. For everything." He nodded, his eyes shining. "I'm so proud of you, Alara," he said, his voice thick. "Your mother would be, too." Those were the words I had longed to hear for a decade. They didn't erase the years of pain, but they settled over them like a healing balm. As I settled into my dorm room, arranging my textbooks on the desk and pinning my watercolor paintings to the corkboard, I knew this was more than just the start of college. It was the start of my life, a life I had claimed as my own. The ghosts of Diane and Aiden had faded, becoming distant figures in a chapter that was now closed. The relationship with my father was a work in progress, but it was a hopeful one. One evening, I walked down to the shore near campus. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink. I thought of the girl I had been a year ago, scared, silent, and convinced her dreams were too small to matter. She was gone. In her place was someone who had faced the storm and found her own strength in the turbulent waters. The ocean before me was no longer just a dream my mother had given me. It was my future. And it was vast, and deep, and entirely my own.